All right. Pardon me, I'm eating a bagel because Dawn Ray reminded me to take care of myself because that's the sort of thing she's good at. Dawn Ray Ammon, one of the two founders slash den mothers of the FireCon conference, which is a amazing conference and taught me everything I know about running conferences. So if you get a chance to attend FireCon in Zoom, it's well worth it. Next, I want to turn it over to Mike Jack. Let me try if I get it right. Stoumbos? I think that's
Stoumbos, yeah.
Okay, that's how you said it last night. So I kept saying Staum. So
Yep.
Mike is a newly minted Writers of the Future winner who will be in the volume that's coming up in April and will be at the workshop, and I hope to meet him there. He's also a teacher of many different subjects, and my most recent roommate at Superstars Writing Seminar, another conference that I highly recommend. And Mike wants to talk to us about planning your novel. So do you need to share, Mike?
I do, yeah.
Okay, let me make sure you can.
All righty, thanks.
All right, you should have sharing.
All right, I believe I see it. All right, let's see if this thing goes up okay. And if it doesn't, we'll do some adjustments. All right, and because I'm probably going to be switching between windows, I'm planning on, keeping this in not full display mode. If that turns out to be an issue, then we'll adjust as we go. Hello, everyone. So, one thing I'm going to note up front, this is a novel planning talk. This is also a real-time exercise. So I highly recommend having a notebook or making a copy of the worksheet that I will go ahead and drop in the chat. If I can readdress the chat. Oh, never mind, my view mode didn't work for that. I'm going to drop it in the chat. Sans the share. And this is something that I recommend people try regardless of their stage in their current novel, or honestly, if they've already finished the novel. So whether you have a new harebrained idea that you want to tackle, or you're partway through, or you've already finished, whether you've done nanos or long running, I've been working on this for the last 7 years or so, kinds of novels, like, it really doesn't matter for trying this exercise. It is not a be all end all, but it can be really helpful for being able to get some ideas going and solidifying those ideas. The quick and dirty novel plan worksheet looks like this. I went ahead and posted that one in the chat, so hopefully that is accessible. If you don't manage to make a copy of it, or if you're working offline and writing stuff down, we are going to be going through the questions step by step. And so by the end of this, you will have written a condensed version of your novel plan, and along with it have kind of an elevator pitch. So this is a convenient lead-in from the last presentation. I think a couple of them people had mentioned elevator pitches. I know that I heard about it in the last one as well. Because anytime somebody asks you what your book is about, it's really nice to have something solid and condensed that you can talk about reasonably quickly. And also to lead in to the end, but hopefully not put people too much on the spot, it would be great if by the end of this session, we can have a few people share out their elevator pitches that they develop over the course of this session. All right. So those are some of the disclaimers going in. This is the quick and dirty novel plan. And I am Mike Jack Stoumbos. So about the Mike Jack and the origin of QAD. So a couple things to note about me, and Martin did mention I'm a teacher and a tutor. I started in high school English, and along with that was the person who was asked to lead the creative writing clubs. I became a NaNoWriMo coach, first for teenagers and then for adults, and now I'm doing that on a pretty regular basis, and then doing a lot of summer workshops for kids and teens and things like that. So while my own publishing, I guess my own author career in being published and more recognizable has mostly been over the last year, I have been in the teaching field a lot longer. I'm not going to claim to be the expert on how to plan and craft a novel, but I'm definitely comfortable and familiar with some of the ways that people will try to approach writing, even from middle school, high school, and adults who are just starting their writing. And I've had opportunities to teach this particular workshop to authors who are far more established than I am. which was intimidating the first couple times that I did it. And I'm like, this is fun. I'm into it. The other reason that the quick and dirty formulas came about was I do a lot of role playing games. I've been a GM and a DM, and I create resources for different role playing groups. And the quick and dirty character creator was, I think, the first one that I made available for forums. And so, along with that, I started pulling out different resources for writing as well. And in author communities, I lead NaNoWriMo and off-season NaNoTribo group. So NaNoTribo is through Superstars writing seminars. And for the last couple of years, I have been running these 60-day novel writing challenges. And these are mostly for people who have not gone full-time author yet. I am in that bracket. I have not gone full-time author yet. But I'm setting myself up to try to write 3 to 4 novels, start to finish a year, and be able to get those out there. And so having some quick ways to address, well, how do we set up a setting that's engaging? How do we set up a character that we want to follow for a whole book? And how do we come up with enough of a plan to start a book so that this harebrained idea has at least a trail of breadcrumbs to follow? And frequently people would ask, do you want the long version or the short version? And this became in the classroom and in the D&D groups, the long version, the quick and dirty version. So this is why we get to the quick and dirty novel plan. So why use the quick and dirty novel plan? Once again, got the worksheet posted in the chat. Hopefully y'all can access that. If not, Martin, let me know so I can repost it in there. Did it end up showing up, Martin?
Yeah, I've got it open.
Cool, good. All right. Oh, hang on, let me close that. All right. The main reason why it came about is if you feel stuck when people ask you, what's your book about? And so this was originally developed about 10 years ago based on other classes that I had attended, and then being in high school, creative writing clubs. I was the teacher moderator for after school creative writing clubs, and people were always wanting to write a novel, and then people would ask them, what's your book about? And they'd say, oh, well, kind of a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I don't know, I'm not really sure if I want to talk about it. And I led a charge of we need to be able to get over that and to talk about our books so we can bring people in and be able to actually motivate ourselves to keep writing them. So then along with that is if you want to start a new novel but don't really know how to start, and whether you've written a novel before, whether you've written 10 novels before, that is a strong possibility that you will run into a new concept that you want to write out and be like, I'm not sure which method will work best here. And then if previous attempts at no plan novels or specifically outline novels have not worked for you, whether you're a plotter, pantser, or plantser, that should say plantser instead of pantser again, I'm going to go ahead and change that right here because I can. I'm going to go with doesn't matter. I think you should give it a try either way. I don't know how many people in here would consider themselves plotters, pantsers, or plantsers. And if you're familiar with those terms, cool. And if not, the basic idea is that plotters will go by an outline and follow whatever kind of plan or format or formula makes sense to them. Pantsers have ideas, sit down, start writing, don't stop, and hopefully get to an end. And plantser is the loose term used for anything in between. This one, you can really go either way with it. You can feel like you're a total pantser and still have a quick and dirty novel plan that is going on in your head, regardless of whether or not you have put it into an outline. So we're going to go through these 7 questions, and we're going to do them in chunks. So for starters, genre. If you had to pick one main genre and no more than one subgenre for your story, what would they be? Go ahead and jot them down. Avoid the temptation to choose too many for this exercise or when you're describing your book to people. And here's one of the examples that I love calling to mind. Oh yeah, it's a historical adventure, circa World War I, supernatural creature feature, horror, love story, but with a lot of comedy. If people are previewing ahead and recognize this one, this is a real story. This would be The Mummy. And all of those apply. All of those genre notes totally apply. But realistically, for the purpose of not confusing or scaring away anyone that you want to have read your book in a critique circle, a potential reader, an agent, don't scare them away by tacking on too much. Pick the main genre and one subgenre. All right, assuming that people have that, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit further. I'll give more pauses when we have pause sections. Number 2 is setting. Where and when does your book take place? And then 2 follow-up questions. What is special or different about the world? And what is a problem in the world? One thing to consider before writing out your own is think about your favorite book or movie. How would you describe it? Typically, when we're writing our own novels, we can get really stuck in wanting to say everything. We're going to want to talk about every single political, religious, cultural, linguistic, whatever thing for a world that we've created. And I think this is even more true for people who write fantasy or science fiction, especially in these big, immersive second world universes. In a classroom setting, I would ask for a show of hands on this one, but I assume a lot of people have experienced that. Yeah. But think about in your favorite book or movie, how would you describe it? If your favorite movie were Star Wars, you would probably not try to list off every single species or planet that you remember. You might, and then most people would leave the room by the end of that speech. But in Star Wars, you can start with it's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Or you can say Star Wars is this, this universe that has a galactic empire and a rebellion that's trying to fight against the galactic empire. And there's this Jedi society that, depending on which book you're in, may or may not still exist, that uses the Force, which is a kind of magic, and laser swords. That gives enough information for people who might be interested to get interested in it without you having to go through everything. So for setting, where and when, what is special or different, and what is a problem in the world. The problem is something that we will come back to in soon. Okay. I'm going to briefly check the chat to see if there's anything going on here. Cool. All right. If we have anyone who has, gone into this quickly and like, cool, I already got my setting written down and want to drop it into the chat or unmute yourself and say it out loud, that would be awesome. So we can get like just an example on the spot of a setting with a where and when, something special, and at least one problem. And if we don't, that is okay. But, sometimes it's helpful to ask along the way. All right. We have one from somebody in the audience. We should call him Martin. 1927 Michigan with Supernatural. The world is near doom and bootleggers are bringing it down. Nice. Cool. We've got a where and when, something special about the world, and a problem. World is in doom. Bootleggers are bringing it down. Excellent. All right. Check the chat. We got one more. 2080s Australia. The island is overrun with cloned dinosaurs, which have taken over the ecosystem. Awesome. And one thing that I want to make note of in the one that John just dropped, the special about the world and the problem, I think, are very hand in hand, right? They might even be the same thing. So the island is overrun with cloned dinosaurs is both very special and a huge problem with this world and for the people who live in it. Cool. And I'll read off one more. We've got Steven saying Northern Victoria Island and Anaheim, California in the near future. These are the two major focal points for power from a conjunction of universes, but the universes open hole, the conjunctions open holes between universes. Ooh, cool. So multiverse peril of whatever kinds of things might spill into or out of these ones. Now, one of the great things about dropping a quick setting in for somebody else to react to, especially somebody who hasn't read your work, is you can see which things make them excited. This is something to keep in mind as we go further into the actually creating an elevator pitch. And so we'll be able to bring some of these ones back in a bit. But let's get a protagonist in there. I highly recommend when you're doing a quick version of a novel plan, especially if you haven't done a style like this before, that you think about how the protagonist ties directly into the problem. Some people, I've been a teacher long enough that I can totally acknowledge that some people will go through worksheets out of order. And if you decide to, cool, that's up to you. It's your worksheet. I'm going through it in order because I kind of like how each one leads into the next. So the problem of the setting is going to still be percolating in your brain while you're talking about the protagonist. I'm not sure why I wrote protagonist twice, but I can delete. This is funny. I get to do these things on the fly when I notice the errors there. 3 protagonists. Who is your protagonist? Briefly describe them. And this can be physical. This can be the sound of their voice, the clothing they wear, whatever you think is important. And then along with that, we're going to get a protagonist special quality. What is at least one skill or trait that sets them apart from others? And the protagonist's goal. At the beginning of the story, what does your protagonist want and what drives or motivates them? And we'll chill for a moment on that. If you're wondering where we're going to hit a pause to catch up, it's going to be right after these ones, because 1, 2, and 3, we can get right at the beginning as a good chunk to start things off. I'm going to monitor the chat and otherwise mute myself for a bit while people write. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and hopefully not interrupting too much. And if I am, and you want to like be in focus mode and keep writing, go ahead and do so. But I want to address one of the frequent questions that comes up on this, or one of the problems people have with this particular style of outline. Sometimes people who are writing, once again, I'm going to say science fiction and fantasy, particularly adventure, adventure style YA fantasy, I have noticed, they're like, well, I actually have more than one protagonist. And I mean, I think that's fair. You do what makes sense in your story. One recommendation that I give for folks with that is do this for as many main characters as you think are important POV characters for your universe. And, you know, for some people, like, well, drat, that sounds like extra work. And for some people, they get really excited and they're like, ooh, cool. I get to write this whole, you know, plot outline and pitch from the point of view of each of the major characters. And you could do this in a lot of different ways with, you know, just movie examples that a lot of people know. I do go to things like The Mummy and The Matrix and Star Wars Episode 4 because those are ones that I have seen over and over again. And I think enough other people have that I can kind of draw out some things about them. And for Star Wars, who is your protagonist? We can start with Luke Skywalker, you know, the kind of white that he wears in the opening movie, and, you know, the feathered haircut that blows in the breeze with the twin suns. Special quality, well, he is a skilled pilot, but he's also somebody who's force adept and wants to go join the rebellion and save the universe. And that ties into his goal, right? And that's pretty easy to do. The cool thing with something like Star Wars, if you're like, well, I also want to talk about Han Solo, or I also want to talk about Darth Vader, like, you can do that. You can write through this thing from the antagonist point of view as well and be like, all right, what does Darth Vader want? How do we describe them? What is his special quality? What is his goal? And go from there. I'm going to leave these ones up on the screen so people can give a completion of the first 3. And then once we have 1 or 2 brave souls who are ready, we'll have them either unmute themselves and read it or drop it into the chat. So genre, setting, and protagonist, which formatted super weird. Huh. I will see if I can unformat it right here. Sorry about the technical difficulties. This is one of those things that I thought that I had ready to go, and then it turned out that I didn't. Oh well, we'll make that work. All right, I see that Martin has dropped some info in about the protagonist. J-Rod has dropped in some info about the protagonist as well. Excellent. So J-Rod says the protagonist is a botanist who's on Mars trying to grow his own food and learning about different parts of science in an effort to survive. Excellent. Yeah. And for anybody who hears or reads that and is into science fiction or botany or Mars, would be like, that's awesome. I want to know more. Even somebody who is not necessarily into botany or Mars, but likes survival tales is going to see In an Effort to Survive, and it looks like it's, surviving against the elements. You're going to be like, that's awesome. I want to know more. And that's one of the goals of something like this. You're going to figure out which things sound really exciting to you, and then which things might sound exciting to other people. Gerard has noted that is the premise behind The Martian. I agree. I had the same comparison. I wasn't quite sure, so I was figuring if you were writing your own thing, I didn't want to rain on the parade there. But yeah, yes, I've read and recently watched The Martian. I liked the film adaptation too. I have not listened to the audiobook yet, but I've heard that was good. Cool. All right. So while people are potentially finishing or noodling on their own, I'm going to go ahead and go through a quick example of one that I wrote during one of these workshops. So, a couple months ago, I ran one of these ones, and in real time while working through it, I was just jotting out what I was doing for a novel that I was in the middle of writing. That one actually got published yesterday. So like it's still very clear in my mind. And this was the plan at the time. Did things change? Sure. But here were my three getting started. Genre, science fiction, space opera. Setting, early 2100s in local solar space, early days of the Interstellar Initiative, a cooperative interspecies alliance and venture. And the problem was there's infighting and distrust between allied species, a former war in which humans gained a reputation for destructive military might. And the protagonist is Darren Lidstrom, a young hotshot pilot who's barely been off Earth for a year. Special quality, he is a good pilot. He's invested in friendships with alien species, more curious about exploration than conflict, idealistic, eager. And this one, I was just like brain dumping. I'm not going to use all of these in the pitch. Has a psychic connection with a space ghost from a former enemy of the human race. While I was reading this out loud, people leaned in and said, ooh, on that part. I'm like, well, isn't that an interesting thing that stands out? Clearly, I should use this if people are intrigued by it. And protagonist's goal wants to pilot a command class starship to other worlds and be part of exploration missions. There's a lot more that I could say, but for the moment, that made sense. That was like really good enough for solidifying who that character was to me and to people who hadn't read the series, in a way that seems to work. All right, rechecking in the chat. Cool. Wow. So, in theory, at this stage, you would have had genre, setting, and protagonist. Now, like I said, this could be something that you have not started writing yet, or it could be something that you have been in the middle of drafting or have already finished. If you were at one of the things that people might call a writer's block, if you're at one of these stops or dead ends where you're like, I'm not sure where I want the story to go, sometimes it can be helpful to return to the roots here. And looking at these three things, genre, setting, protagonist, you might be like, oh, well, based on the problem of the world and the main character's goal, I kind of know the direction I need this to go in order to get it to finish. But let's go ahead and jump forward. So we're going to consider the next three: crisis, plot, and stakes. I know that there's a lot of debate on how people describe and define plot for planning purposes. And I think any way that you make it work for you to be able to write what you want to write and then to be able to describe it to people who might be reading it is great. But crisis, we can boil it down pretty effectively to what event, call to action, or crisis will set the story in motion. How does it affect the setting and or protagonist? I am saying setting and or protagonist once again to call back to the earlier things. Because if the crisis does not directly or obviously affect the setting or protagonist, then, well, it might not be the best crisis to focus on in your book, or it might not be the best crisis to focus on for the purpose of your pitch. there might be a different one that is much better, right? It might seem like, um, let's see, blowing up Alderaan in Star Wars Episode 4 is the biggest crisis that sets things in motion. And it is a big crisis. There is a massive amount of people killed by a Death Star that is demonstrating that it has planetary destructive forces. But the crisis that sets Star Wars Episode 4 in motion, you might hear some minor debate on this, but most people would say that it's when Luke's aunt and uncle are killed, and then suddenly he is like, I don't have a home anymore. I'm going to go travel with Obi-Wan Kenobi, learn the ways of the Force, be a Jedi like my father before me, hop into a plane and save the universe. I mean, if not for that destructive event, the things probably wouldn't have gone forward. And realistically speaking, the destruction of Alderaan is something that Luke doesn't know about until he gets there, once he's already on the road. The plot, the steps, goal, or direction, what must the protagonist do to address the crisis, fix the problem, and the stakes, what happens if they fail. I have been told by a lot of people that the stakes are the hardest thing to write and the hardest thing, the most frequently missed thing when agents or editors are looking at a description of a story. I don't know if this is actually true. It's just something that I've heard enough recently. And I'm like, oh, drat, that is something to consider. So the next three: crisis, plot, and stakes. And just in case you're wondering about like how an example of that one goes, I will go through the same live draft from earlier. So here were the next steps that I ended up writing: crisis, plot, and stakes. Crisis: an old incorporeal enemy of the human race starts massing a fleet in orbit of Earth, prompting humanity to reconcile with past wartime atrocities. That's the thing that, gets all of the characters focused on a single problem or issue in this particular book. Plot: what must the protagonist do to address the crisis, fix the problem? Well, using his connection with the psychic entity, Lidstrom must fly into the growing cloud of orbiting enemies to attempt to end the war before it begins. Stakes: what happens if they fail? The aliens will swarm and consume all life on Earth in retaliation for a planet humans destroyed. Tenuous lines between the humans and the other aliens is on the brink of collapse. Big stakes. Not all stories have those kinds of stakes that sound as big to the outside world. Sometimes the stakes are very personal, very introspective, and they might seem like life or death to that character. If you're into like courtroom dramas and things like that, often it's focused on one person and proving their guilt or innocence. And the stakes are, if proven guilty, this person goes to prison for however long, or loses their reputation, loses their family, gets executed, so on and so forth. And it becomes a one-person drama. We can make it even more focused than that. If this person does not manage to clean up the error of their ways, then their spouse will leave them and they will be destitute. It's really up to you how you want to set up the stakes, but think about the stakes that you think relate closely to the crisis, protagonist, and the problem in the setting. All right, go ahead and write it out. I will mute myself again and I'll monitor the chat. Yeah, so as people are working on these ones, if we have anyone who wants to unmute and share theirs, they're totally welcome to. Yeah, J Rod, if you want to read yours, please do.
Okay. Actually, I'll do. I'll start from the beginning. So, if you had to pick one genre, main subgenre, um, fantasy, uh, fantasy, subgenre, modern world, maybe. Um, my setting is a secondary world where everyone has magic. The problem in my world is specifically that there are people who want to take over a continent. My protagonist's special quality is that um, his special quality is literally that he has magical abilities that allow him to dream and learn things faster than other people. As in, he lives among dryads who have a lot of time to live, and he has to catch up with them in his lifetime. The dreams help with that. At the beginning of the story, he just wants to make his dad proud at the beginning of the story by being war chief. What drives him is because, like, it was his dad's last wish for him to be a good war chief. So he does that. Crisis. As I wrote here, Arn's father, the war chief, has been killed, and at 8 years old, it is necessary for him to step up and become the war chief, or he's going to get killed. That's a great crisis. So, your dad dies, and if you don't do his job, someone's going to kill you. He becomes and leading his people against the trolls, which is part of the plot. But he becomes aware of a bigger conflict throughout his continent. So thus his goal becomes to unite his people with their ancestral enemies, or the stakes are all of his people will either be killed or enslaved. No big deal.
Excellent.
Of course, this is like reminiscent of like America and like what happened here.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Cool. Thank you, J Rod. Yeah. We've also got one in the chat from Martin. Check and see again if there are other folks who have posted. Martin wrote for Crisis. So it's between the two main characters. Crisis, her friend was kidnapped and sent a mental call for help, and he has detected a future disaster and is there to discover and stop it. One group of bootleggers thinks that they will ascend a goddess as a weapon to crush their foes. The other group simply wants revenge. Deb, the kid, and a party crowd are caught between warring factions. Plot: rescue the kidnapped friend, stop a war between sorcerers and gangsters, and that's only part one. And stakes: literally the end of all reality. Though the reader won't know that at first. Oh, and can they get to the church on time? I think that's a really fun end tag there. We've got from Stephen, Crisis. Paul and the two professors are transported to the planet in the alternate universe, and a dragon is transported to the other direction to our planet. Plot: Tug must find a way to work with the dragons to return to Earth, and stakes: the humans will eventually be killed and probably eaten by dragons. Awesome. Cool. All right. One of the things that I'm going to say in a very optimistic way is that hopefully as you're going through this, whether you've written the story or not, this process should be somewhat fun to be able to think through. These are the things that got me excited about this idea in the first place. And now I've got them in a way that makes sense and I've distilled down. If you have not started writing yet and you don't have ideas for these things yet, go ahead and go with the first thing that comes to mind. Whatever's most exciting to you right now, you can always change it later. But for the moment, whatever's the most exciting justification to fill in the cracks right now, use it. See if that is something that can give you some momentum. All right. So this would be the pause and like read over what you've written. Some of you might not have finished yet. And I will grant that people might be working through these ones at different rates. Some people might want to make it very, very clear and precise. And some people might be like, cool, here's my first idea. And some folks are also just going to be more familiar with this outlining process or with the book that they're writing. So we are going to go at different paces, and there will be some time at the end for people to continue to work through it. But I would recommend the pause and read what you've written. And to ask yourself, does it sound like a book blurb or a movie trailer? And are you excited when you read it? And I think movie trailer is a great comparison, even though, yes, for the most part, people here are thinking about writing novels. If you're writing film scripts as well, cool. I don't know as much of that world, so I can't make the commentary on it. But the back of book blurb or movie trailers are meant to excite people enough that they will want to read and or see whatever the story is, right? And that's going to be the goal. So if you're excited by it, then somebody else is likely to be as well. The other thing that goes along with this, most likely they're going to be exciting the kinds of people who are interested in that genre, in that kind of setting, in those kinds of stakes and stories. You don't need to go for universal appeal, but go for what you think would appeal to people who might like similar content. And that takes us to the 7th part, comps. What 2 or more stories and styles would you compare your story to? These do not have to be 100% accurate. And I've heard some different commentary back and forth about like whether a comp needs to be only in print literature, only produced in the last 5 years, only from a bestseller list, or only from, if you're in the indie scene, an indie list. I truly don't know where the hard and fast lines go. I can also say that in interacting with agents and editors and other acquisitions publishers, they seem to go all over the map in terms of what they will actually respond to. I've had so I've been through a lot of the query process in the last year or so, and had a number of full manuscript requests, and some of those I was able to do verbally and see how people reacted, and some were through query letters, and I wasn't able to see how they reacted other than, we want to read more of your book, or not. And whether I used a film or book, something that was recent, something that was old, it didn't seem to create any data that I could correlate with. So that's one thing that I'm going to note from there. An example from a film. There's a film ad, the first time that I distinctly remember thinking about a comp used in a trailer. They said it's Star Wars meets The Matrix. If you're wondering what the heck this one was, this was for the film Titan AE. And they ran that ad specifically with the deep voice saying, it's Star Wars meets The Matrix. And neither of those is even close to accurate to the world or plot of that story, but it was exciting and close enough. So an example that I've used, The Expanse meets Star Trek TNG, and more accurately, If Leviathan Wakes were set at Starfleet Academy, was the one that I used for the one that got my space opera series sold. And it was the one that I was most excited by, and I figured the people who would like that kind of story would also be excited by it. So that is my general commentary, food for thought. So for the comps, oh no, I can just stay on that screen. For the comps, use whichever things make the most sense to you. These ones you do not have to drop in the chat at the moment, because we're going to go into mashup mode. For comps, if you want to, let's see, checking to see if there's anything else that needs to be read out here. Cool. For comps, if you want to list more than 2, because there are more that come to mind for different aspects of your story, be it genre, setting, mood, some major scene that the character will go through that you might want to relate to the movie, like, it doesn't matter too much. Choose the thing that makes the most sense to you and is the most fun. Because we're going to go into elevator pitch, Mad Lib style. So this is directly from that worksheet. On the 2nd page, we've got the turn it into an elevator pitch. So using the pieces above, build an elevator pitch, fill in the blank, Mad Lib style. Like I said, I originally developed this one in high school. Like I was, sorry, not when I was a high school student, when I was a high school teacher. I originally developed it in high schools because I had a lot of students who wanted to write novels and had written drafts of novels and were having trouble figuring out how to talk about them with people. And so I'm like, all right, well, I'll pull from some of the things that people in the industry are saying is good to do. And I'll also just try to put it into a formula so that nobody feels weird or uncomfortable saying, this is what my story is about. And we boiled it down to a formula, and it turned out to be a lot of fun for the students. And then when I brought it to adults, it turned out to be fun for the adults. So this is the mode that we go with. genre, comma, comp 1 meets comp 2 in setting, comma, crisis and effective crisis, period. Now, comma, protagonist with trait or ability must plot fix crisis or stakes. There are many other formulas that people have talked about and used. So there's the similar in terms of basic idea, but just slightly different format is when X happens, then Y person will have to do Z in order to fix the problem. Or question mode, when X happens, will Y person be able to do Z action in time? You may have heard things like this. Cool. But for now, go ahead and just drop them in Mad Lib style. Try to go for something that feels short and feels fun. And while you're working through that one, feel free to drop in questions in the chat. The goal is to be able to have some Q&A over the next 10-ish minutes. And then in the last 5 to 10 minutes, to have people share out the pitches that they formed through this process. And we can go into more troubleshooting and follow-up questions if people happen to have them. But that's what we're working on for the moment. I'm going to mute myself so I don't distract people while they're writing this one. But yeah, drop questions or ideas in the chat, and we'll go from there. Okay, I'm going to chime back in while people are writing. So once again, if you have questions, go ahead and post them. And then, when you're ready and willing to share, we're going to get some examples going. Just in case you would like to see the example from the last one, I'll go ahead and go through that. If you're in your own mode and want to keep writing your own pace, feel free to do so. So here is the elevator pitch version of what I had described before. So I'm sorry I did not go through this live this time around, but one of the times that I ran the session, it was a very much write as I went. And then at the end, went through the process of populating the pieces in. This one I did call Ender's Game Meets the Expanse instead of Star Trek, but that is okay. That felt more relevant for this particular version. So with that formula, I wrote space opera, Ender's Game meets the Expanse. In the 22nd century, when several species cooperative adventure, the Interstellar Initiative, is finally taking off, a former enemy of the Alliance reappears and amasses a strange growing anomaly over Earth. Now, a young initiative pilot with a rare psychic connection to an alien entity must fly into the center of the anomaly and face unpredictable dangers or risk the destruction of his home planet. And we've got an elevator pitch. It's quick. Honestly, the back blurb of the book was largely inspired by this. Usually at the beginning of a writing process, I will try to put together some kind of a quick pitch in my mind that I can write down. And like literally I'll write it down in my hand and have it next to my computer while I'm working so that I can look at it before a writing session and be like, all right, what am I focusing on? What is the thing that I'm trying to get done? And in the case of more complicated plots and more complicated groups of characters, then, sometimes I will write more than one, depending on what kind of plot line or what kind of character I'm going to be working with. So while people are working on this one, once again, feel free to mute the call for a few minutes and knuckle down and work on your own. Or if you're kind of thinking about the pitfalls, we can talk through those ones. These are in the worksheet that was attached. So some of the big questions have been like, what if my book has multiple main characters? Short answer, choose one for now. And the long answer is do one for each major character. Realistically, if you think that every character thinks that they're the hero of their own story, because they probably do, they would have some kind of, crisis, goal, plot to reach that goal, and stakes if they fail. They're not always hugely aware of it, but like it can be a good way to go if you're thinking about, all right, I've got 4 core characters. I want to follow each of them reasonably evenly. And that works too. What if my plot is really complicated? I've heard this question a lot as well. I don't have an exact answer for it. Here's what I've written down. For this exercise, focus on a problem with the setting, one crisis that drives the main character, and the direction the character needs to go to fix the crisis. One exercise that you can try, and this is something that we can't do in a massive group session, but we can with smaller groups. Oh, I realized that I was not thinking about the time right, because we have to break at 50, not at the hour. Drat. Oh well, I'll get through the end of this one. You can read out your plot points to somebody else and then see what they read back to you or see what they picked up on as the main important bits. And then otherwise, I will let you kind of dig into those ones from there, because I would like to read a couple of them that have shown up in the chat. So Phil says, fantasy, Game of Thrones meets anime. Between the neighboring human and rabbit nation of Azinia and the reptilian nation of Camellia, a struggle for power breaks out between revolutionary forces and supernatural entities. Several lost souls from a variety of backgrounds struggle to survive or come out on top, or fall to the destruction of both lands. Cool. We got a couple people who are in process. Tina says, what about the more romance pitch format? He's say his motivation goal, she's her motivation goal. Together, they, yeah. Cool. Julie says, science fiction with, we'll find later comps. When Angela Walker discovers survivors of an alien spaceship crash while on a backcountry camping trip with her children, she must work with the alien leader to protect them all from a fearful world. Cool.
And we are at 50 minutes.
Excellent. Well, sorry I misgauged the time, thank you all. Hopefully you got something out of this, or at least the start of it. Yeah, you should all have access to the worksheet. If you want to keep running those on your own, you're totally welcome to do so.
Yeah, this was incredibly focusing exercise. It's impressive. So